I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house. This week I'd like to talk about The Ruins, a film from 2008, which I get the feeling is a little underappreciated, not often talked about, which is a shame because it's a really effective, one and done, mean-spirited, much nastier than you're expecting it to get little film. I suspect it perhaps got lost in the shuffle and mixed in with an awful lot of films that it doesn't really bear allegiance to. I mean, Saw came out in 2004, then in 2005 Saw 2 and Hostel came out. Hostel 2 came out in 2007. So after this wave of so-called torture porn had happened, The Ruins came along, and I think it maybe got lost in that mix of American kids go abroad and get fucked up kind of films, or the people have to perform surgery on themselves or other people kind of films, which is unfair because The Ruins, I think, bears more DNA in common with Eli Roth's earlier Cabin Fever than it does these so-called torture porn movies as they're known, for better or for worse. And okay, fair to say that maybe it's got lost a little in the mists of time because the setup is relatively derivative. Sure, we've seen this kind of film plenty of times, but I think what The Ruins does with the setup it's got does make it stand apart from all its peers, and I think it's something quite special. But yes, to be fair, it does deal with a group of American kids who are on vacation. They're sunning themselves at a Mexican resort at the tail end of their trip when a German tourist that they've recently made friends with convinces them to join him and some Greek friends to visit a Mayan ruin that doesn't show up on any of the local maps of the area. What, I can hear you say in unison, can possibly go wrong? After a half a day's drive and trek, once they reach this Mayan pyramid, they are trapped there by local villagers who prove that they are ready to use deadly force to stop the group leaving the pyramid. Once they're there, the relentless sun, coupled with the fact that they've got very little food and water with them, is a horrible enough situation, made worse once they learn what their eventual fate is destined to be. I don't want to talk in any detail, and I am not going to spoil any further the setup of the film, what happens afterwards, and what is actually going on with The Ruins, because if you haven't seen the film, I can guarantee you two things. Firstly, the setup of Americans going abroad and coming a cropper of the locals is going to sound standard and predictable to you. But secondly, I guarantee that you will never guess where the real threat from this movie is coming from. What I can tell you is that once they're atop this ziggurat, there's a steady ratcheting of tension that doesn't ever let up until the movie ends. We bear witness to a situation that starts off bad and then gets worse and worse and worse. There are moments of extreme gore, and I think they're always born out of necessity from the situation. These kids are in a fucked up situation. So where you've got something like your Saw movies, well, you're in one of Jigsaw's traps, so you're going to have to do X and Y to get out if you want to survive. In Hostel, it's even simpler than that. Rich people want to pay good money to torture and kill other people. So once you're in that room, that's what's going to happen. With The Ruins, I think it's a little bit more circumspect. It does seem to grow more organically out of the situation they find themselves in. So it does seem to be less, although I hate the phrase, less torture porny. It revels less in that kind of physical trauma and self-inflicted violence than something like Hostel appears to. Most of the story takes place on the ziggurat. It's not exactly a one-location film, but it's as near as damn it. After the setup, they're there on top of the temple and they can't get off. And it's a testament to the storytelling, which I would include the acting, the direction definitely, the editing, the way it's shot, that the story never gets boring, even though these characters can never leave this very small location. The pace doesn't ever flag for me. I don't ever get bored being there. I don't ever feel like I'm seeing the same thing over and over again. So rather than being a torture porn kind of movie, in a weird way, like Cabin Fever, it's a slasher film, but without the slasher. It's got the villagers, and you never understand what they're saying, and they're kind of very much othered in the film, but it's a bit like a Deliverance or a Wrong Turn, a backwards locals kind of movie where the backwards locals aren't the threat, aren't the antagonists. It's a body horror movie, which is perhaps a couple of steps behind David Cronenberg, I'd say. Cronenberg certainly would have had these horrors act as a meditation on some aspect of being or philosophy of self, or he'd have had them work as a metaphor for some sort of aspect of society. But maybe what makes The Ruins feel so refreshing amongst its peers was that it wasn't really trying to say anything like this. It didn't have a big message or a larger meaning. It seems simply to want to entertain and thrill, and it does that in spades. Unless, I guess, the message of the film is that Westerners shouldn't travel abroad, but we all know that already, right? Now, that lack of meaning, that lack of subtext might be a turn-off for someone. I totally get that. I dig my horror films that are about something. And one aspect of this film perhaps being slight in that regard is that you don't really ever get to know the characters. We get little thumbnail sketches of their relationships and interrelationships at the start, at the resort. And really what we find out as the film goes along is how these relationships either strengthen or break down when they're put under extreme pressure. Given that they've got very little character to go on in the script, I have to salute the entire cast. Honestly, it's going to be for them mainly an exercise in acting and reacting with what they're asked to do. The cast are uniformly great, but I'd like to flag up Jenna Malone, who's in this movie, because I always find her kind of exceptional. I think she's a fantastic screen presence. I think she's fantastic in Neon Demon, and she's really great in this. I'd completely forgotten she was in this movie, so when I gave it another spin recently, it was a very pleasant surprise to find out that she was in this. I will say this though, the ending of the movie is very abrupt. I was watching the unrated Blu-ray of this and was actually quite grateful that there were a couple of alternate endings to watch. We watched the unrated Blu-ray ending, then we watched the theatrical release ending, and then an alternate ending. And I don't, for movies, normally go straight to all the alternate endings and watch them all, but this film just ended like a clapperboard shutting. And in a weird way, now all these three various alternate endings sort of float around inside my brain in some sort of weird liminal space of possibility. They all, for me, could be potential ways that the story ends. A sort of Schrodinger's cat of an ending where they're all nebulously true or possible at the same time, which is a weird situation to be in. If you haven't seen it and you'd like a refreshing twist on the cabin in the woods scenario, I highly recommend, as it should be obvious by now, The Ruins. If you have seen it, tell me, do you like it as much as I do? Do you think it's underappreciated? Or do you think that there's a reason it's sort of been lost a little bit to the mists of time?